The stage was set, the lights bright and unforgiving. The debate was reaching its boiling point, with the audience hanging on every word. Chris Christie, with that signature smirk of his, leaned into the microphone. His voice was loud, commanding, dripping with condescension. "You know, Jasmine," Christie began, his eyes narrowing as he aimed his attack, "maybe if you actually understood the complexities of leadership, you wouldn't be playing to the crowd so much. The truth is, people like you only rise by selling a fantasy, not by facing the reality of power. You're just another politician, playing the game for applause." A murmur spread through the room. Some audience members shifted uncomfortably, others looked eagerly at Jasmine, waiting for the inevitable response. Christie's words hung in the air like a gauntlet thrown at her feet, a challenge to her credibility and conviction. Jasmine Crockett, cool and composed, didn't flinch. She took a slow breath, her eyes locking onto his with an unwavering calm that made the room pause. The silence was deafening, the tension thick. Christie's smirk widened, convinced he had cornered her. But Jasmine wasn't rattled. Not even close. And then, with a slow, deliberate tilt of her head, she spoke, her voice cutting through the thick atmosphere like a blade. "Chris," she said, her tone sharp but measured, "maybe if you'd spent half as much time listening to the people you claim to represent instead of grandstanding on every stage you get, you might have actually learned something about leadership. But you wouldn't know that, would you? You've been too busy pretending to be someone you'll never be." The room went dead silent. Christie's face froze. The crowd, a mix of surprise and admiration, shifted uncomfortably, some stifling their gasps. Jasmine's words landed with the precision of a scalpel. The smug confidence that had once defined Christie's stance was now visibly slipping, the weight of her words crashing into him. But what came next was even more shocking. As the camera panned across the faces in the audience, you could see the disbelief and admiration flicker in their eyes. This wasn't just a political takedown, it was a moment that would echo long after the debate ended. The temperature in the room had shifted. What had begun as another televised political sparring match was quickly turning into something much more significant. This wasn't just about words, it was about America's future. The audience felt it, the pundits felt it, and perhaps most of all, the candidates felt it. Jasmine Crockett and Chris Christie weren't just fighting over policies or party lines. They were fighting for something much deeper. The clash wasn't just personal, it was ideological. It wasn't just about winning a debate, but about what that victory would mean for the direction of the country. America, at this moment, stood at a crossroads. On one side, you had those who wanted to preserve the old ways of power, entrenched, exclusive, and far too comfortable. On the other, you had a new wave, one that sought to rewrite the rules, lift the voices of the unheard, and ensure that dignity, truth, and justice weren't just political slogans but core values. Chris Christie represented the establishment, a man who had climbed the ladder of politics through deals, maneuvering, and power plays. He wasn't just a politician, he was a symbol of everything that many Americans had grown tired of, big talk and big promises that were never fully delivered. His words were calculated, his rhetoric was polished, and his record spoke volumes about how far he was willing to go to maintain the status quo. But as the stakes in this debate grew, it became increasingly clear that the future wasn't in the hands of the powerful elite anymore. The future was in the hands of those brave enough to challenge the very systems that had held power for so long. Jasmine Crockett wasn't just running for office, she was running for the dignity of every single person who had been ignored, dismissed, or overlooked by the political establishment. She wasn't here for show or spectacle, she was here for substance. The stakes were high because her platform wasn't just about reform, it was about transformation. This wasn't about playing by the old rules, it was about creating new ones. And as much as Christie would have liked to think otherwise, this debate wasn't going to be won by the person who could shout the loudest. It was going to be won by the one who understood the real power, the power of truth, integrity, and the will of the people. As the debate raged on, it became more than just a political exchange, it became a fight for the very soul of the nation. What America would look like in the years to come, who would be heard, who would be left behind, and who would hold the reins of power, was being decided in this moment. The clash between these two figures, seemingly worlds apart, was about far more than just winning or losing. It was about what kind of country America would be in the future. Would it be a place that continued to bow to the whims of the powerful few, or one that gave voice and opportunity to all? And then, just as the tension reached its peak, the stakes became even clearer. This was no longer just about this debate, no longer just about winning in the moment. What happened next would leave everyone rethinking the balance of power in American politics. The outcome of this exchange, the choices each candidate made, would ripple through the political landscape for years to come. Jasmine wasn't just debating policy, she was declaring a new vision for America. And Chris Christie? He was fighting to protect a system that had served him and his allies well, but one that had left millions behind. As the audience held its collective breath, it became undeniable, this wasn't just a clash of candidates. This was the future of the country on the line. And what happened next? It would change everything. For years, Chris Christie had built his career on a foundation of brashness, arrogance, and ruthless political maneuvering. Known for his larger-than-life personality, he reveled in the spotlight, often relishing the moments when he could silence critics with a sharp quip or a forceful demand. His political persona, cultivated over decades of public service, was one of power, unapologetic, relentless, and unapologetically self-assured. He knew how to play the game, and he played it better than most. Born in Newark, New Jersey, Christie had grown up in the political machine. From an early age, he understood the importance of connections, influence, and, most of all, the ability to wield power. After earning his law degree, he didn't take the usual route. Instead of a quiet practice, he threw himself into the political sphere, securing a job as a U.S. attorney, where he became known for his aggressive prosecution tactics. It wasn't about justice, it was about making an impact, about being remembered. Christie's rise to prominence was marked by his tendency to speak bluntly, sometimes to a fault. Whether as governor of New Jersey or as a key player on the national stage, his words were often sharp, cutting through the noise with brutal honesty. But that same sharpness often made him a polarizing figure. His unapologetic demeanor won him loyal followers but just as many detractors. He reveled in the power that came with being the bad guy, the person who didn't play by the rules and was willing to say the unspeakable. It was this unfiltered persona that had propelled him into the national spotlight, from his infamous bridge scandal to his contentious relationship with the media. It made him stand out. And standing out, in a world where politicians often fade into the background, was a rare and powerful gift. But for all of his political savvy and charisma, there was a darker side to Christie's career. His tactics were often less about governing and more about grandstanding. Whether it was taking a shot at political adversaries or using press conferences as an opportunity to play the role of the tough guy, Christie was never one to shy away from the spotlight. His approach to leadership was about domination, intimidation, loud demands, and a complete disregard for the humility that good leadership often requires. He wasn't interested in consensus or collaboration, he was interested in control. This approach had worked for him in the past. But it wasn't the right approach for the world of politics that was emerging now. The political landscape was shifting. The people were beginning to demand something different, something more authentic, more relatable, and, above all, more respectful. They no longer wanted leaders who shouted down their opponents or used their platforms as a means to prop up their egos. They wanted leaders who would listen, who would speak truth to power, and who would uplift those who had been pushed aside for too long. It was here that Christie had failed to evolve. In his world, the ends justified the means. He never had time for nuance, for the messy, complicated nature of real leadership. His dismissal of others, his ability to alienate those who didn't fit into his vision of politics, was his greatest flaw. He thought he could bulldoze his way through every debate, every election, with his forceful personality and his well-rehearsed rhetoric. He had always believed that strength meant winning the argument at all costs. And that's what made him dangerous, his belief that he was the only one who had the answers. It wasn't enough to defeat an opponent on the merits of policy. No, for Christie, it was about crushing them, proving that his brand of leadership was the only way. And so, when he stood across from Jasmine Crockett, he saw her as nothing more than another opponent to be dismissed. But there was something different about Crockett. She didn't play the same game. She didn't respond to provocation with escalation. She didn't need to yell or belittle to prove her point. Christie's condescension didn't faze her, it only revealed how much he underestimated her. And in that moment, when he threw his verbal jab at her, Christie believed he had her cornered. He thought his usual tactics, brashness, insult, dominance, would work as they always had. What Christie didn't realize was that his refusal to see Crockett as more than just another politician was his greatest mistake. His arrogance had blinded him to the fact that he was facing someone who wouldn't bend to his power plays. Jasmine wasn't here for theatrics, she was here to change the game. And in his arrogance, Christie had made the mistake of thinking that she was just another face in the crowd, someone to be easily dismissed. But tonight, that persona, the one he had so carefully crafted over the years, was about to face its biggest challenge. The narrative Christie had written for himself was coming to an end, and he didn't even know it yet. His career had been built on power and control, but in that moment, he had met his equal. And it was in his dismissal of Crockett, in his belief that he could easily undermine her, that his downfall began. He had underestimated her, and in doing so, he had underestimated the very force that would bring him to his knees. As Christie tried to maintain his cool, Crockett stood tall. And the audience could already sense it, the moment was coming. The clash wasn't just political, it was personal. Jasmine Crockett's journey was never going to be the easy one. Born and raised in the heart of Dallas, Texas, she had seen both sides of the American dream. The daughter of immigrants, her childhood was marked by a combination of sacrifice, struggle, and an unwavering belief that success wasn't handed to you, it had to be earned. Her parents, both working long hours in jobs that didn't offer benefits or the security they deserved, taught her early on that nothing in life was guaranteed. But they also instilled in her something far more valuable, a fierce work ethic and a belief that anyone, no matter where they came from, deserved a voice in the decisions that shaped their lives. Jasmine's mother, an educator, would often tell her stories about the injustices she'd witnessed as an immigrant in a new country. The discrimination, the hurdles that seemed insurmountable, but also the hope that persisted, even in the face of overwhelming odds. Her father, a small business owner, worked tirelessly to keep the family afloat, always trying to build a better future for his children. They were both selfless, driven by a desire to create opportunities that they'd never had for themselves. But Jasmine knew that just working hard wasn't enough, she had to fight for those opportunities, just as her parents had fought to give her a shot at a better life. She excelled in school, driven not only by her own ambition but by a deep-seated belief that education was the key to breaking generational cycles. She went on to graduate from college and law school, overcoming countless obstacles along the way. The son of an immigrant family knew what it was like to feel alienated in an institution that often felt cold and indifferent to people like her. There were moments when she doubted herself, when the weight of her struggles seemed too heavy to bear. But she never quit. With each setback, she pushed harder, faster, and smarter. What Christie didn't realize was that this woman had fought for far more than just a political victory, she was fighting for truth and justice. Her rise wasn't a matter of ambition alone, it was a matter of principle. The world she came from wasn't one of privilege or protection, it was one where every day felt like a battle for survival. And she had fought, not just for herself, but for the generations that came before her and the ones that would follow. Jasmine knew what it was like to be dismissed, to be underestimated, to be ignored by the very systems that were supposed to protect and uplift people like her. Her fight wasn't just against political opponents, it was against an entire system that had failed the people she loved and represented. Her work as a public defender, fighting for those who couldn't afford representation, gave her a first-hand look at the flaws in the system. Every day, she witnessed people, often young men and women of color, whose lives had been shattered by circumstances beyond their control. The legal system, she saw, wasn't built to protect them, it was built to punish them. The more she fought, the more she realized that the system wasn't broken, it was working exactly as it was intended to. And that was something she couldn't accept. Jasmine's political awakening came when she realized that the battles she fought in the courtroom weren't enough. She wasn't just fighting individuals, she was fighting a system that was stacked against them. The walls of the courtroom were high, but they didn't compare to the walls of the state legislature, the halls of Congress, or the executive office. And so, she stepped into politics, where she believed she could make a real difference. She quickly gained a reputation for being grounded, for speaking truth to power. Her unwavering commitment to justice and fairness drew people to her, people who had been let down by the establishment, people who had been ignored for too long. Her rise wasn't just about policy or political connections, it was about her ability to speak to the real struggles of everyday Americans, immigrants, working families, people fighting to survive in a system that didn't care about them. But her political journey wasn't easy. She faced countless roadblocks and naysayers who questioned her ability to make it, who tried to reduce her to just another politician. They called her too idealistic, too emotional, too unpolished for politics. But Jasmine knew better. She knew that her authenticity was her strength, not her weakness. She had seen the systems that were built to keep people like her out, and now she was fighting to break those systems down. When she entered the debate against Chris Christie, it wasn't just another political contest, it was the culmination of everything she had worked for. She wasn't there for fame or personal gain, she was there for the people she represented, the ones who were constantly told they didn't matter, the ones whose voices were never heard. She wasn't going to let Christie, with his smug dismissiveness, erase their struggles. She wasn't going to let him dictate the direction of the country with his power games. She was there to show the world that a new kind of leadership was possible, one grounded in truth, dignity, and the unwavering belief that everyone had a stake in America's future. From humble beginnings, Crockett had fought her way to the top, always staying true to her values. She had never let go of the lessons her parents had taught her, to fight for those who couldn't fight for themselves, to stand up for what was right, and to never, ever back down. Tonight, those values would shine through. As Christie continued to play his games, she was ready to show him that she had come to this stage for something much greater than winning. She was there to win, yes, but more importantly, she was there to make sure that truth, justice, and the will of the people triumphed. And that was something Chris Christie, with all his swagger, would never understand. The exchange had quickly shifted gears. What had begun as a back and forth of political positioning had devolved into something much more personal. Chris Christie, the seasoned politician known for his sharp tongue, had grown visibly frustrated. His smirk, which had once been a symbol of his confidence, was now replaced with the tight-lipped tension of someone losing control. Every attempt to belittle Crockett seemed to push him further into a corner, yet he refused to back down. "You're not fooling anyone, Jasmine," Christie said, his voice rising. "You may talk a good game, but at the end of the day, you're just another politician, just like the rest of them. You talk about change, but you haven't done a thing to make it happen. You're not even in the game. You're just playing the part." Crockett didn't flinch. Her eyes remained locked on him, cool and composed. She had heard it all before, the dismissive remarks, the undermining, the assumption that because she wasn't from the establishment world, she didn't understand power. Christie's words might have rattled someone else, but not her. She had spent too many years in courtrooms, standing up for people who were never given a voice, to let a political heavyweight like Christie rattle her. "You've got it all wrong, Chris," Crockett replied, her voice steady, unyielding. "I'm not playing a part, I'm fighting for something real. I'm not here to protect the status quo like you are. I'm here to change it." Christie scoffed, shaking his head with exaggerated disbelief. "Change?" He leaned forward, as if daring her to respond. "You really think you can change anything? You think you can just waltz in and fix everything that's broken? You're naive, Jasmine. People like you don't understand how this system works. You're out of your depth." The audience could feel the tension escalating. Some exchanged glances, whispering among themselves. Others sat frozen, their eyes darting back and forth between the two combatants, sensing that the moment was coming, something big was about to break. But Crockett remained calm, unwavering. With each word, Christie's confidence seemed to grow, but Crockett's calm was unwavering. She wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of getting under her skin. She knew exactly what he was doing. He was trying to provoke her, to make her lose her composure, just like he had done with countless others in the past. But he hadn't realized that this was exactly what she had prepared for. Every insult he threw, every attempt to undermine her only made her more focused, more determined. "Chris," she said, her voice quieter now but still carrying the weight of someone who had been in the fight long enough to understand the stakes. "You keep talking about the game, but you're missing the point. This isn't a game. This is about the future of this country. You want to talk about how things work? Fine. Let's talk about how they work for people like me. People who have been pushed aside, ignored, and left out of the conversation. This system. It's rigged. And I'm not here to play by your rules. I'm here to rewrite them." A murmur rippled through the audience. Christie's face tightened, and for a split second, his facade slipped. He wasn't used to being challenged in this way, not from someone like her. Not from someone who didn't shrink back, who didn't get rattled by his words. "You think you can just stand there and preach to me?" Christie snapped, his tone growing sharper, more desperate. "You think you're the first person to talk about injustice and change? I've been in this game longer than you've been alive, Jasmine. What makes you think you have the answers? You're just another rookie trying to ride a wave of popularity. I'm a man who's made real decisions, tough calls that people like you will never understand." Crockett stood taller now, her composure more powerful than ever. "You know what, Chris? You're right. I haven't been in politics as long as you. But I don't need to be. I've spent my life fighting for people who are told they don't matter. And I'm tired of watching people like you use your power to trample over them. Your decisions might have helped you climb the ladder, but they've left the rest of us behind. I'm not here for your approval. I'm here for the people who've had enough of the same old thing." Christie's jaw clenched, his hands gripping the edge of the podium. The room was electric now, every person in the audience on edge. The insults were flying faster, the back and forth growing increasingly heated. But there was something different this time. The audience wasn't reacting the way Christie was used to. They weren't nodding in agreement or laughing at Crockett's expense. They were watching her. They were listening. Christie tried again. "You think the people you represent even know who you really are? Do they know you've never had to make the tough choices? Do they know how easy it is to stand on a soapbox and talk about change without knowing what it takes to actually get things done? You're a politician, Jasmine. Nothing more, nothing less." But this time, Crockett wasn't responding with a sharp retort or a cutting insult. She wasn't playing into his game anymore. Instead, she gave him a quiet smile, one that sent a chill through the room. "Funny," she said softly, almost as if speaking to herself. "I never realized change was so easy to dismiss until I saw it coming from you." Christie faltered for the first time. The crowd shifted, the air thick with anticipation. Crockett had once again turned his words back on him, but this time, it was different. It wasn't just about who had the better argument. It was about something more, control. The tension hung in the air like an electric charge, and Christie could feel it. He had lost the room, and he knew it. The debate was at its breaking point. Every word that left Christie's mouth seemed to be pushing him deeper into a hole he couldn't climb out of. His anger, once masked by confident bluster, had now become palpable. His arrogance, once his greatest strength, was now his greatest weakness. He wasn't just losing ground, he was losing the room. But Jasmine Crockett wasn't rattled. She was no longer just reacting to his insults, she was waiting, patiently, for the right moment to land the final blow. Her calm was now her weapon, and the room could feel the shift. The audience, who had initially been on edge, now leaned forward in anticipation. They knew something big was coming. Christie, sensing his own desperation, went for a final attempt to assert control. "You don't get it, Jasmine," he said, his voice strained but loud. "You're just another rookie who thinks she can waltz in here, spouting off about justice, but you have no idea what it takes to actually govern. You want change. Well, guess what? Change doesn't come from people who've never had to make the tough choices. It comes from those who know what it means to lead, really lead." He stood there, chest puffed out, as if daring her to respond. His eyes gleamed with the same smug arrogance that had carried him through decades of political battles. But Jasmine didn't flinch. She simply stared at him, her face unreadable, her posture relaxed but ready. The room was dead silent now. Even the journalists with their notepads in hand were still, as if bracing for what was coming next. Christie had just thrown his last punch, expecting the audience to rally behind him, but there was something different in the air. They were waiting for her. Jasmine took a breath. For a moment, it felt as though time had slowed down. She could hear her own heartbeat in her ears. She could feel the weight of every word she was about to say. She knew this wasn't just about winning a debate, it was about standing up for the millions of Americans who had been ignored, who had been told they didn't matter, who had been silenced by people like Christie. This was her moment. Crockett stepped forward, her voice clear and unwavering as she addressed Christie, and then, the audience. "Chris," she began, her tone cold but controlled, "you stand up here acting like you have all the answers. You talk about tough choices, like you're the only one who's ever had to make them. You talk about leadership, as though it's a badge you wear, earned through your decades of power plays and backroom deals. But here's the truth you won't admit, you don't know what real leadership is. Leadership isn't about winning at all costs, it's not about cutting people down to build yourself up. It's about lifting others. It's about serving, not ruling." The room seemed to hold its breath as the first crack in Christie's armor appeared. His eyes narrowed, but he didn't interrupt. He knew he was losing control, but the idea of admitting defeat was something he couldn't yet process. Jasmine continued, her voice gaining momentum, gaining strength. "You say you've made the tough calls, Chris. But let me tell you something, you've never made a tough call in your life. The tough calls are the ones where you don't just look out for yourself, where you fight for the people who have no one else to fight for them. You've spent your whole career using people as stepping stones, talking down to them like they're beneath you. But you know what? The people you've stepped on are rising. They're done waiting for you to get it." There was a brief moment where Christie tried to respond, but the words caught in his throat. He could feel the tide turning, but it wasn't in his favor anymore. Crockett's words were like a steady drumbeat, methodical, yet unyielding. The audience, once divided, now leaned toward her. Christie's attempts to rebut were getting weaker, his usual biting comebacks failing to land. Jasmine's final blow was coming. She could feel the energy shift as the crowd leaned forward. They weren't just listening, they were hanging on her every word, eager to hear what she would say next. And then it came. The line that would change everything. "You've spent your life talking about power, Chris," she said, her voice now ringing with clarity. "But what you fail to understand is that real power doesn't come from controlling others. It comes from empowering them. Real power is knowing that you've done everything in your ability to help those who've been left behind. Real power is understanding that leadership isn't about making yourself bigger, it's about making others stand taller." There was a collective gasp from the audience. For a split second, the world seemed to stop. The words hung in the air, cutting through the tension that had built up for the last few minutes. It wasn't just a line, it was a moment of clarity, a moment of truth. Jasmine had just done what no one had dared to do, she had exposed the emptiness of Christie's power. His entire political persona, built on domination and arrogance, crumbled under the weight of her words. Christie stood there, stunned, his mouth slightly open. For the first time in the debate, he looked small. His defense, his entire narrative, had shattered. He tried to recover, tried to pull something together, but the crowd wasn't listening to him anymore. They were all looking at Jasmine. The tables had turned, and everyone could feel it. The audience erupted. Some clapped, others cheered, but there was a unified response, one that had been building throughout the entire debate. Jasmine had won. And she had done it with a single, devastating truth. Christie looked around, his eyes wide with disbelief. He had been undone. The fight was over, but he didn't know how to concede it. He stood there, caught in the aftermath of Crockett's mic drop moment, unable to recover, his words falling short. The room was no longer divided. It wasn't just a debate anymore. It was a victory, for truth, for dignity, and for the future of a country that demanded better than the tired politics of men like Chris Christie. The debate was over, but its impact had only just begun to ripple across the nation. As the final moments of the event played out, the camera zoomed in on Jasmine Crockett's face, a face that was no longer just a contender but a force to be reckoned with. She stood tall, her composure unshaken, while Chris Christie, defeated and disoriented, struggled to recover from the savage takedown she had just delivered. The room buzzed with the stunned silence of the audience, but outside those walls, the world was already reacting. Within minutes, Crockett's words were all over social media. Hashtags like hashtag Crockett wins and hashtag Chris Christie shutdown began trending across Twitter. News outlets scrambled to cover the moment, their headlines blaring the same message: Jasmine Crockett destroys Chris Christie in epic debate, and a new star emerges, Jasmine Crockett's historic takedown of Christie. The internet had exploded. The digital world, so often flooded with distractions and noise, had come to a sudden, sharp focus. This was the moment everyone had been waiting for, the moment when the underdog had risen and silenced the political titan. The memes began to flood in, and they were relentless. GIFs of Crockett's calm, measured delivery, juxtaposed with Christie's increasing desperation, filled timelines. That moment when you realize you've been outclassed, one tweet read, accompanied by a clip of Crockett's final mic drop line. Another user posted a video of Crockett's remark, captioned, "And that's how you take down a political bully." The image of Christie, stunned into silence, became the emblem of his defeat. But it wasn't just the memes and hashtags that dominated the conversation, it was the reaction from across the political spectrum. The pundits, who had once dismissed Crockett as a newcomer, now found themselves scrambling to revise their opinions. On Fox News, commentators initially tried to downplay the moment, but even they couldn't ignore the undeniable power of her words. Chris Christie got more than he bargained for, one conservative pundit remarked, though their voice wavered slightly with the weight of truth. "She's the real deal." Meanwhile, over on MSNBC, the tone was triumphant. "Jasmine Crockett has just shown the political world what leadership looks like," a host declared. "She didn't need to raise her voice to dominate the debate, she just spoke the truth. And the truth always wins." Their guests, former politicians and political analysts, all nodded in agreement, acknowledging that Crockett had, in one fell swoop, shattered the narrative that had been built around the political elite. Celebrities, too, weighed in with their reactions. Ava DuVernay, the acclaimed director, posted a tweet that went viral: "Jasmine Crockett just dropped the mic on the establishment. We're witnessing the birth of a new kind of leader." From Hollywood actors to influential musicians, Crockett's performance had transcended politics, it had become a cultural moment. The applause for her courage, intellect, and poise echoed across entertainment industry platforms, signaling that she was no longer just a politician, she was a movement. The reactions weren't limited to the left. Even some moderate Republicans, tired of the same old faces and tired of Christie's bravado, began to show their support for Crockett. Former Republican strategist Steve Schmidt tweeted, "What Jasmine Crockett did tonight wasn't just a political win, it was a statement. We need leaders who can unite, not divide. Bravo." But it was on Twitter that the real battle was taking place. Political figures from all corners of the country began to weigh in. Senator Elizabeth Warren, a fierce advocate for progressive policies, tweeted, "Jasmine Crockett just showed us what real leadership looks like. She's got the heart and the vision to take this country forward." The response was overwhelming. Within hours, Crockett's follower count soared into the hundreds of thousands. The public was rallying behind her in a way they hadn't for any politician in recent memory. On the other side, Christie's team issued a statement, attempting to downplay the debate's outcome, but it was clear that their efforts were in vain. Christie, who had prided himself on his ability to dominate debates, had been exposed as a politician out of touch with the changing tides. His post-debate interviews were stilted, defensive, and lacked the same energy he had once commanded. "We're focused on the issues, not these side shows," he snapped in one interview, but it was clear, the battle had been lost, and no amount of posturing could change the fact that he had been outperformed by a newcomer with integrity and intelligence. The viral response reached a crescendo when Oprah Winfrey shared a clip of Crockett's mic drop moment on Instagram. The post garnered millions of likes and sparked a wave of comments from fans, political figures, and ordinary citizens alike. "This is why we need leaders who represent us," one comment read. "We need more Jasmine Crocketts in Congress." Even Oprah, known for her influence on political matters, commented, "This is the kind of leadership we need for a better future." By morning, the media was still buzzing. Cable news outlets, once skeptical of Crockett's rise, were now scrambling to secure interviews with her. Polls began to show a dramatic surge in her popularity. The political insiders, who had doubted her ability to make an impact, were suddenly paying attention. The debate had done more than establish Crockett as a contender, it had solidified her as the voice of a new generation of politicians who weren't afraid to challenge the establishment, to call out corruption, and to fight for the people who had been left behind for far too long. The nation was now watching, waiting to see what she would do next. Hashtags continued to trend. Memes and reactions flooded the internet. Political commentators continued to dissect every word she had said, but one thing was certain, Jasmine Crockett had captured the imagination of America. And with that, she had cemented her place as a rising star, a force who had proven, once and for all, that truth and justice could still triumph over the old ways of power. And as the shock waves of that debate reverberated across social media and beyond, one thing was clear, the political world had just been changed. The debate was over, but Jasmine Crockett knew that the real work was just beginning. As the applause for her victory continued to echo through the room, she stood there, absorbing the moment. It wasn't about the spotlight or the accolades, it was about something far more important. Tonight, she had not only bested a political titan. She had done something much larger, she had proven that standing firm in your values could overcome even the most formidable of adversaries. As the cameras flashed, and the press swarmed around her, she knew that this moment was bigger than any one person, bigger than any one debate. It was about something much more profound, a message about the power of truth, the importance of dignity, and the resilience required to stand up for what's right, even in the face of overwhelming opposition. The entire debate, the entire struggle between her and Chris Christie, had been about more than just policy differences. It was about principles. It was about the values that guide the decisions we make every day. For far too long, politics had been a game of power, manipulation, and rhetoric. The loudest voices often drowned out the truth, the real stories of those who had been forgotten or ignored by the political elite. People like Crockett, who had lived the struggles of everyday Americans, had been silenced by those who thought their words mattered more simply because of their status or position. But tonight, Crockett had changed that narrative. In the heated back and forth, she had stayed calm, even when Christie tried to provoke her. When he belittled her, she didn't stoop to his level. She didn't respond with petty insults or attempts to tear him down. Instead, she spoke truth to power. She reminded him, and the world, that leadership wasn't about bullying others into submission, it was about lifting them up. She had shown that dignity didn't need to be loud to be powerful, that strength came from remaining grounded in one's values, no matter the pressure. For her, the victory wasn't just about winning the debate. It was about restoring the ideals of leadership that had been distorted for far too long. It was about reminding America that the real leaders aren't those who wield power for personal gain. The real leaders are those who serve with integrity, those who make the hard choices to stand up for the voiceless, to fight for justice even when it's inconvenient or unpopular. "This isn't about me," Crockett said in a later interview, her voice steady, as she addressed the nation. "This is about all of us. This is about the people who've been forgotten, who've been told they don't matter. This is about standing up for what's right, no matter how tough the fight. It's about speaking truth, even when it's uncomfortable. It's about dignity in the face of arrogance and integrity in the face of power." Her words were a call to action, not just for her supporters but for everyone watching. Crockett wasn't offering easy solutions or empty promises. She was asking for a deeper commitment, a commitment to build a society that reflected the best of our values: honesty, fairness, and respect for all people, not just the powerful few. As the aftermath of the debate unfolded and the country buzzed with reactions, it was clear that Crockett's victory was about much more than a political win. She had set a new standard for what it meant to lead. She had shown that real leadership wasn't about silencing your opponents or tearing them down, it was about standing up for what was right, even when it meant facing down the most powerful people in the room. And for the millions of Americans watching, her message was clear: no matter how big the fight, no matter how powerful the enemy, you can always stand firm in your values. You can always choose dignity over arrogance. You can always choose truth over manipulation. And in the end, that is what will carry you forward. This was never just about politics, she continued, her voice rising with conviction. It's about building a better future. One where everyone has a voice. One where truth matters more than power. One where we stop playing games with people's lives and start making decisions that actually help them. Her words resonated deeply, not just with her supporters, but with people from all walks of life who had felt overlooked, marginalized, and ignored. For the first time in a long time, people saw a leader who wasn't afraid to speak the truth, who wasn't afraid to challenge the system that had kept so many people down for so long. This wasn't just a victory for Crockett, it was a victory for truth, for the belief that in the face of arrogance, dignity will always triumph. And as the world watched her rise, they saw more than just a politician, they saw the embodiment of a new kind of leadership. A leadership that was built on the values that should have always been at the core of American democracy. For Crockett, the battle was far from over. She knew that what she had accomplished tonight was just the beginning. But as she looked out at the swelling support, at the faces of people who now saw her as their voice, she knew one thing for sure: the fight for justice, truth, and dignity had just found its champion. And that champion was ready to lead. In the days that followed, her words continued to echo. The debate had been a defining moment, but it was only the first of many. Crockett had not only won the debate, she had won the hearts and minds of a nation. The ripple effect of that victory would shape the course of her career, and of the country, for years to come. Tonight, we witnessed more than just a political debate. We saw the power of truth, dignity, and the unwavering strength it takes to stand up for what's right, even when the odds are stacked against you. Jasmine Crockett didn't just win a debate, she showed us what real leadership looks like. She reminded us that courage isn't about having the loudest voice in the room. It's about speaking up for those who've been silenced, fighting for justice, and staying true to your values, no matter the opposition. Now, it's your turn. The fight for truth and fairness isn't over, it's just beginning. Crockett's victory is a beacon for all of us who believe in a better future, one where integrity triumphs over power, and where standing up for what's right is the ultimate victory. If you believe in the message of hope, dignity, and justice that Jasmine Crockett represents, it's time to make your voice heard. Subscribe to this channel to stay updated on the journey, share this video with your friends and family, and join the movement for a fairer, more just society. This isn't just about politics, it's about all of us, together, pushing for a change that reflects the values we all hold dear. Stand up for what's right, just like Jasmine Crockett did tonight. Together, we can make a difference. Don't let this moment pass, join us and be part of the change. Subscribe, share, and let's keep fighting for the future we deserve.